Well, hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to tonight's Joe Chaffee Weather Show here on my YouTube channel. And I want to give a special welcome to all of you who may be watching from Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And I did get the message. My 61-year-old brain suddenly decided, or almost 61-year-old brain, suddenly decided that Newfoundland was two words, and I've always known all along it was one, but for some reason I was typing it up as two. I have since gone and corrected all of that, and I've gotten your message. So we're going to be spending time on Dorian. There's a shocker, because it ain't done yet, and there is more to deal with here on Saturday, because it looks like we may have the equivalent of a Category 2 hurricane going into Nova Scotia sometime Saturday afternoon into Saturday evening, and from there heading on into Newfoundland. It's very interesting. The Hurricane Center, in their discussion tonight, wrote about the fact that Dorian actually is getting a bit better defined in terms of the eye. And you can see it to my right. There's just kind of have a wide shot there, but we'll go in tighter in a moment. And by the way, my colleague Joe Rayo will be joining me shortly, and we're going to talk about Dorian and the impacts to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. We'll go back to talk about also about what happened today with the landfall at Hatteras, North Carolina. So far, this historic hurricane, and it will be retired. There will never be another Dorian again. And by the way, because I've had this question asked too, Dorian obviously is a name that could be either male or female. In this case, it is a male name, because Erin was the next one, female, and Fernand was the F storm, and Gabrielle is the G storm. So it's boy, girl, the way it goes. Anyhow, we had Dorian strengthened to a Category 3 as it was moving up along the South Carolina coast. It turned to the northeast overnight, and it passed pretty much right over Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. I actually went back and pulled the European model from August 31st. And guess what? The track was pretty much on target, that going back 5 days. So it gives you at least a good feeling that when you get inside that 120-hour period, you're in a good range when it comes to looking at these storms. And it also took it right up to just off of the south coast of Nova Scotia. Now, there are a couple of things that are happening here. One is that it apparently looks as if Dorian may hold on to tropical characteristics a while longer, and it's taking a track that is bringing it up over the Gulf Stream for a good portion of its trip northward. So that is probably going to keep this the core of this storm, which all along, by the way, has been impressive and hasn't wanted to break down in any way, shape, or form. Even if it weakened from time to time, it would wind up coming right back. Well, the storm is actually showing up quite well on the satellite tonight. You go back past sunset, you can see that core is fairly solid, and the eye is also making a comeback. So we may have this, the tropical characteristics of this hold on for a much longer period of time. You can see the clouds to the northwest, and those clouds, the trough that is lifting it up to the northeast. And when I have a water vapor imagery loop that I want to show you, and we're going to just kind of make sense of all of this in terms of what's happening. La Rayo is making his entrance, as he is known to do. So we will get situated here. And I just was telling everybody how we've got this, rather historic adventure that we've been on with Dorian here. As it moves its way up to the northeast.
Yeah, this is going to be, for people in Nova Scotia, we were talking earlier about the fact that they've had a few tropical systems move on through over the last 20 years, but the one that really made its mark was Hurricane Juan back in 2003, and that's the one that I think a lot of folks in Nova Scotia are using as the benchmark for this upcoming system, and this one looks like it's really going to hit both Nova Scotia and parts of Newfoundland and Labrador very hard, Joe. They don't often see a tropical cyclone of this intensity coming right up at them. And I don't know if you mentioned already that the storm looks like it's actually going to intensify again.
Yeah, so we just started. We did go into that. In fact, just going back to the loop, when it goes to the infrared after the sun sets, I actually laid it back to at the point where it was on the North Carolina coast. But all along, from the time it was down in the Virgin Islands, and even before that, this storm has always had a very solid core to it.
Right.
And
you can still see the eye.
It's there. And the eye has made a comeback now that it's east-northeast of the North Carolina coast, and it's literally riding over the Gulf Stream.
Right.
It seems to be getting energized here. And we've got, gales up, not quite to the immediate coast. There have been some gale force gusts along the New Jersey coast. I saw some numbers into the 40s, and I think Brigantine, New Jersey, about 2 hours ago had a gust of 55.
Right.
But as far as the area from northern Delaware to Rhode Island at the moment, much of the activity has been relatively contained, and there's really not a big deal for that area.
Right.
But it looks impressive.
And we were rather lucky. We, in the immediate New York City tri-state area, I know how some of the mainstream media, try to tell you, a few days in advance, here comes a hurricane, here comes. But as I said a couple of days ago at our editorial meeting to our news director, if this thing didn't have a name, it would just be Friday would just be a
you wouldn't know the
dreary
difference.
Day. That's it. But all eyes are on Dorian because of the fact that it's a potent storm. But again, thank goodness for us, 275 miles southeast of the tri-state area, just a little bit too far to really have a major impact, save for the Atlantic coastline of New Jersey and the south coast of Long Island, getting really beaten with rip currents and coastal flooding and all sorts of
The
stuff.
coastal flooding has been contained, if only because of the fact that it really, we didn't have days of an east wind piling water on.
Right.
We're far enough away from the new moon and close enough to the first quarter, so I think the tides are coming down. So really, it was just one high tide cycle that was that was a problem. And they had coastal flood advisories up for southern New Jersey and for Delaware Bay up until 7 o'clock, and they're done.
Right.
And now the winds are going to be going around to the north, so it shouldn't be a problem there. And for Long Island, also, I think it's really coastal flood advisories are up for minor to maybe a few pockets of moderate coastal flooding should do it.
Yeah. I'm questioning the fact that the Sound Shore of Westchester County is under some kind of a coastal flood advisory. I'm not sure why.
Might be. The only thing I could think of is if when the winds go around to the north, and the South Shore or the North Shore. I'm sorry, which shore are we talking about here?
We're talking about the South Shore of Westchester County.
Oh, the South Shore of Westchester County.
But they're
Okay.
Long Island Sound.
Yeah, the north. Yeah, you would think that the wind is going to be north blowing it out.
Right.
So maybe it was just precautionary.
Better safe than sorry.
Yeah. Tropical storm warnings are still up for Chesapeake Bay to Fenwick, Delaware, probably for not much longer. But we've got warnings up for Cape Cod and the islands, southeastern Mass. We also have tropical storm warnings up for eastern Maine from Bar Harbor to Eastport. You don't see that too often. And hurricane warnings are up for Nova Scotia. The Hurricane Center actually looks like it tracks it right over, comes in along the south coast of Nova Scotia. I don't know exactly how close it comes to Halifax. And then comes out on the north side and passes close to Newfoundland. And at this point, of course, we're going to see it morph into a powerful post-tropical cyclone.
Right.
So timing here is going to be interesting with what's going on in the upper air.
That position for Sunday at 2 p.m. On the map there, that is very close to a place called St. Anthony's on the northern part of Newfoundland, the island. And I was there back in 1999. All the townspeople, whenever a major cruise ship or passenger liner comes in, literally the whole town goes to the shore area and waves and says hello to the big deal for them.
Right.
It's a very lovely area. In fact, I don't know how many of you saw. I have yet to see the Broadway show Come From Away, because in Newfoundland, some of you may have heard that on 9/11, a lot of the planes were not able to land back in the United States, and so a lot of planes ended up landing in Newfoundland. I think in Moncton, New Brunswick too. I mean, that's a very lovely area. It's a very beautiful region. A lot of the people there are very, very nice. So it's kind of sad in a way that they're about to face what really looks to be a
bit of a
damaging,
powerhouse.
a very powerful system.
Well, hurricane watches are up for Newfoundland, and we also have tropical storm watches, and that's in the pink and yellow shading. There's a little bit more time because that's more along the lines of Sunday. So if they're going to do anything, they'll probably do it tomorrow in terms of upping them to warnings or making whatever changes they need to make.
The Hurricane Center said there was a question as to, because it's going to be making the transition from a tropical system to an extra tropical system, and the transition time would be happening right about the time that the storm would be interacting with Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. So, but again, as they stressed in their discussion, it doesn't matter if it's a hurricane, it doesn't matter if it's an extra tropical system, it's going to be a bad storm. No question about that.
All right, so I pulled up this water vapor image because I thought it was pretty useful in sort of illustrating what's happening. You got two troughs here. So here's the first one right in here. And it's moving along. And of course, Dorian is right there. And let me try to make this pen just a little bit smaller. So the first trough is lifting it up to the northeast and taking up toward Nova Scotia. But right behind it, this system coming down here, the second shortwave, that looks like a pretty strong shortwave that's driving southeastward. That is going to catch up and catch Dorian probably at the point that it's crossing Nova Scotia. This is probably going to wind up over time slowly losing its tropical characteristics. But this second shortwave may wind up energizing it.
Right.
And this was the concern, and the Hurricane Center mentioned that in their discussion. And you can see the players very clearly on this water vapor imagery with Dorian here. Here's the first shortwave trough that's lifting it up to the northeast and taking it toward Nova Scotia. And then the fairly obvious, whenever you see a twist in the upper atmosphere in terms of the moisture or the clouds, it's usually telling you that you've got some kind of powerhouse shortwave trough that's coming down, and that one is going to swing around, and I think it's going to energize this as it makes the transition over from a tropical system to a post-tropical system.
It's going to be a rough time. We've seen the damage that this thing has caused in the Bahamas, and I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot of. And I suspect, and what I've been doing the last day or two, Joe, is I've been listening. It's a great thing about the internet now. You can listen to radio stations not just around the country, but all over the world. And I've been monitoring a few of the stations, the CBC stations that cover Nova Scotia. And it's kind of like, well, there's a hurricane out there, and yeah, it's going to come our way, and there's going to be some wind and some rain. They're really not talking about this.
And you know what? This is a good point, because one of the things that I try to do, and I've always tried to do when I do my live streams, is to keep a certain level of calmness to it.
Right.
And let's remember that the folks up there are very hardy. Okay, they've experienced storms. They've experienced storms pretty much year round. The winter storms up there can be awfully fierce.
Right.
So this is a little unusual. It's a little this is probably on the upper end of the strength scale that they have to deal with.
Right.
But they have dealt with some pretty hefty storms in the past. So they know how to handle this. Gales of 40, 50, or 60 miles an hour is probably not going to be viewed as overly unusual.
Yeah, that's true. But again, the one thing is the strength of the storm. The other thing that concerns me, though, is the forward speed.
Motion.
Here was something that was hardly moving. You could walk faster on Monday than this storm was doing back on Monday on Labor Day. And now it's, 25, 28 miles an hour forward motion to the northeast? That's a pretty fast movement for a tropical system. And you factor that in with, 90 mile per hour
right, that you could certainly have gusts, wind up with gusts over 100 in some places or even higher. The east side, if it's moving at 30 or 40 miles an hour, let's take the top number. Max sustained winds are at about 80. if you're moving at 40 miles an hour, if you're east of the center, you could very well see gusts up 110, 120. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but in theory, that's how it would work. So it's going to be pretty important to not only see whether this thing maintains its strength, and I have the view here. I took the view from Canada in terms of the satellite, so it's on the lower right is where Dorian is, but we don't often look all the way up toward Greenland and on up to the northern part of Hudson Bay. But very busy up there in Canada, and those shortwaves, as we said, that are moving right along. I've got the last reconnaissance aircraft, courtesy of Tropical Tidbits, and this was from 1840 Z, so this is at 2:40 this afternoon. We don't have anything since, because now that it's far offshore, they're not going to have a plane there all nonstop. But you can see that the track has been steadily northeastward. The pressure, it was 958, 959, back to 58, back to 59, back to 58. So it's really kind of holding its own. And you'll notice also that the wind field continues to expand as the storm moves further and further north.
What's impressive to me, thinking back over the many, many years of looking at the hurricane tracking maps, it's impressive to me is that the cone of uncertainty is really very narrow with this. I mean, it's gotten very narrow, indicating that virtually all of the models are showing...
I'll bring it back. We had it up before. We're going to bring it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Showing that virtually all the models are nailing this and agreeing with it. I mean, look how narrow that track is. That's only about a 100-mile cone of uncertainty. It gets uncertain again once you move past Newfoundland and then out over the broad waters of the North Atlantic. And look, it's 2 p.m. Monday, and that's the southern end of Greenland,
right?
Which is
well, as we get further, as we start to gain latitude, and you get into the westerlies, where there's more going on,
right?
As opposed to when you have it down when it was in the Bahamas, where you have this upper high that's collapsing. There's no flow. You have winds in the the steering winds in the upper atmosphere are almost non-existent. It becomes very difficult to forecast where a storm is going to go, because the slightest change in one or two spots upstream or downstream could cause a shift, and you're sort of sitting there wondering, okay, what's it going to do? Here it just kind of gets on the main belt of the westerlies and it goes. So if you've got it, it gets into a general spot. You know that the wind there and all the way up is from the southwest at 30 or 40 knots. You can figure out where it's going to, and it's not going to change.
Right.
You can figure out where it's going to go.
We're not looking at an outlier, for example, that wants to take the storm into central New England or whatever.
Right.
They're all on
there.
the same page.
Here's the upper air view of Dorian tonight on the new GFS. And you can see here also what we were talking about before when we were looking at that water vapor imagery map. You've got this short wave here. You have the second short wave behind it that is that's going to be the one that energizes it. That's back through here. And of course, here's Dorian from earlier today. This was at 8 a.m. So when we move it along, you'll see it lifts up. That first short wave is what kind of punts it to the northeast. And here comes the second short wave that drops down south of James Bay, just as Dorian is about to approach Nova Scotia, and it just gets in. It just wraps it up inside of it. I'll go to the Canadian, the Southeast Canada geography here. Let me get rid of this, and we'll go to the Southeast Canada geography. And here you have it. Here's what it looks like at the surface on the GFS. So it's east of Cape Cod, and Cape Cod getting into some of the heavier rain. Probably better if I use the radar instead of the rainfall. But this is what the radar is supposed to look like Saturday morning. And the rain is already moving into the western part of Nova Scotia. There's a 963 pressure here. Who knows if it's going to be that, or maybe even lower. And approaching the coast as a 958, which is what it is now. And then it goes inland. And this is Saturday evening. The low is inland at this point. I'm going to pull up a sounding, Joe. Let's see what kind of winds we're talking about here. Some of the surface winds. 30 knots, and then just above the surface, it's 70 knots at about 900, a little more than 900 millibars at that level.
Wow.
So it's pretty busy. Certainly in terms of the wind. That's a northwest wind. Let's go to the east side and see what happens. So I put this point is at 44. Now, how lucky was I to pick this? 44.44 west.
Wow.
And I should go play a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
64.28. I'm sorry, 44.44 north and 64.28 west. There's an east wind at 40 knots there.
There's a lot of fours in that.
Yes.
Alexander,
very confusing.
4.
The line is busy. So moves inland over Nova Scotia, right in the middle of it, comes out the other side, and at least on this run, Joe, it goes the low goes west of Newfoundland.
Right.
But
there's an island there. I believe it's called Anacostia Island. I'm not sure whether or not that belongs to Quebec or Newfoundland or Labrador or whatever, but it's out in the St. Lawrence Seaway there. And that
maybe Ben McGinnis can tell us because he's watching from
and
Nova Scotia.
That's the Gaspé Peninsula. I was there in 1972 to see a total eclipse of the sun, and that's also a very lovely area. A lot of churches that are along the roadway leading up to the Gaspé. So this is an area that is nice and quiet. You know, and also I mentioned this to my wife this morning there, and we almost ended up doing this. We went on a cruise earlier in the summertime. In fact, right at the time when summer began. And we were actually contemplating, should we do that or should we go on one of those lovely New England cruises that take you up to the Maritimes of Canada as well during the first couple of weeks of September? I'm certainly glad we didn't do that this weekend.
Yes.
That would have been well, I don't know what you would do in a situation like that.
Well, here's the 10-meter wind, so you talk about over Dramamine. The purple starts the 50-knot sustained wind. And that by tomorrow evening is hugging all of the south coast of Nova Scotia as well as the areas up to the northeast. So the wind is going to be a big deal. But even the inland areas in Nova Scotia, you've got the model generating sustained winds of 25 to 35 knots. That's sustained wind, so who knows what the gusts are going to be.
Right.
So it is going to get extremely busy as far as the winds are concerned. And then in Newfoundland, if it tracks to the west, at least now, bear in mind, I don't know the topography there. Right. So obviously, you folks, if you're watching and you live there, you know far better than I ever could know. So you know the impacts of storms when they track to the west of you or track over you or to the east of you. But this is what the model sees in terms of wind. It would seem that the low tracking the way they have it, that more of the rain will go north and west rather than over Newfoundland itself.
That's still a very formidable wind. All the way up into Labrador and northern sections of Newfoundland. I mean, to see that up there, I mean, I understand, they have very potent winter storms or whatever, but that's still very impressive to see winds gusting. And sometimes I get confused. I was when I was listening on the radio, the CBC in Nova Scotia, they're all talking in terms of kilometers per hour. And,
right.
And the height of the waves in meters, not feet or whatever.
It does sound more impressive when you say 160 kilometers an hour versus
Correct.
100 miles an hour.
Correct.
All right, so back home, of course, we're at a time of year where actually at least the weather in the Northeast and in the Mid-Atlantic states, with the exception of these tropical systems, a lot of the times can be relatively calm, and we still have this. It's funny, Joe, how this overall pattern where we've had this very persistent northern jet since back in June,
right?
Ebbing and flowing, flexing and relaxing, and it pretty much continues in the longer term. We're going to see dry weather here probably into Wednesday or Thursday. It may get rather warm Wednesday into Thursday because the ridge pops back up for the middle part of next week. And then it's got another short wave that tries to flatten it. Then it kind of pops back up again as we go toward the 16th, 17th, and then it just sort of flattens out. And yeah, I know there's something in the lower right corner, but the folks, my regular watchers, know what the rules are when it comes to the long range. I will say, and I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again today. If you think back to a couple of years ago, when we had Irma, Jose, and Maria all take somewhat similar paths, that just like in the wintertime, weather systems may not repeat exactly, but they like to rhyme. So don't be too shocked if we wind up seeing something over the next couple of weeks. And I think, judging by the way that the tropical activity has been, I'd be surprised not to see another system coming out there.
A couple of weeks ago, well, everything is all dead. Well, why isn't anything happening?
And now we're up to the H storm.
Now,
it always happens.
Exactly.
So nice high builds down from the north. The weekend looks good. Really doesn't look all that eventful. High goes out. A little bit of an onshore flow here, maybe Monday into Tuesday. Then we wait for a cold front to try to come through here late in the week. It gets here. It doesn't get here, depending on what model run you look at. So, it's all still Dorian, and I have to say, admittedly, Joe, at this point, I'm just kind of worn out about it.
Yeah.
Just wanted to do what it's got to do, and then we can stop talking about it. So when we come back next week, we'll probably be focused on whatever the next thing is.
Right.
And since everybody's looking, I might as well bring up the tropical satellite. Now, funny thing this morning, I don't know if you noticed, but they actually downgraded Gabrielle to a post-tropical remnant low,
and now they're
only to upgrade it back to a tropical storm 6 hours later. So, and it's forecast to become a hurricane, which was their original forecast for Gabrielle to become a hurricane up in the North Atlantic by late Sunday or Monday. There are two. I'm not really too concerned about the one east of the islands, but the one that's over just southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands looks like that may try to develop. I'm just going to get pull the satellite up really fast.
I seem to remember there was a Gabrielle that approached within 1,000 miles of the eastern seaboard and caused a lot of rough seas, and I think that was in the late 80s.
Yeah.
This is like for me, I think this is like the fourth or fifth Gabrielle, because they come back every 6 years.
6 years.
So.
It's if you look over on the far right, just west of the Cabo Verde Islands, there actually is, you see that swirl there, but there's not a whole lot of thunderstorm activity with it, but there's definitely some curvature. So perhaps as that gains longitude and goes further to the west over the next couple of days, probably when we get toward later Sunday or Monday, it gets a little bit further to the west, it may have an opportunity to get a little better organized. I don't really see too much in the way of wind shear happening, so conditions are certainly going to be a little bit more conducive. I think once it gets west of, say, 35 degrees west, 40 degrees west, it gets into that area, it may start to develop. But you'll notice, Joe, everything's kind of moving very slowly here. Right. So if something forms out there, it may take a long time for it to move across.
So that thing you showed a few minutes ago on, was it the GFS?
Mm-hmm.
Down in the, toward the Caribbean or whatever?
That was in the lower right corner, just north of... Okay,
what would that be? Or is that something that just materialized the imagination of the...
of the model?
Of the model.
Well, let's go back and see if we can trace it. And, again, this is not an endorsement of a forecast of something down the road. We're just sort of, these models do tend to... I always used to joke about the fact that the models have a habit of spitting up everything, including your shoes. But it is that wave comes off the African coast, and it takes almost all week. It really doesn't do very much with it. We're now into Wednesday, and you still have it. Now you have this weak low that's approaching the Caribbean. So it looks like that one goes west, and then there's something else right behind it. So that's when it develops. So there's actually a second wave that comes out, and it weakens the first one that goes into the eastern Caribbean and strengthens the second one and takes it to about just north of Puerto Rico. Then it turns straight north from there up toward Bermuda, and then, of course, you get that nudge to the northwest. Who knows?
When is that?
That's 16 days from now at the end. Please. The last thing we want is to get a named storm out in the tropical Atlantic and have to start talking about it for 16 solid days.
Right.
There was... this was probably a good time since we are dealing with a storm that is going to Canada. It's only fair, I think, that we pull up the Canadian model and see what it's doing. And by the way, I think they did an upgrade on this and took care of a few problems. I used to joke about how the Canadian... which just was in a lot of ways, not a good model to use, and that it needed an upgrade because it just went crazy on some of this stuff.
Right.
To which some people took offense, and they let me know it. So I think they may have done an upgrade because I noticed this tropical season, it's not doing what it used to do, which is spin up a dozen Category 5 hurricanes all over the place. But the Canadian model actually takes it a little bit further south and east of Nova Scotia, but gets it to the same place west of Newfoundland by the time we get to Sunday morning.
Right.
And the European, which we can only see in 24-hour increments, and unfortunately we can't see it on that view, so we'll have to do it on this view and just kind of guess, because the isobars are wrapped so darn tight.
It's like they used to call something like that a moray pattern when they get so tight that your eyes start playing tricks on you.
Yeah. So it's a 946 pressure there southeast of Cape Cod by tomorrow morning. And then we jump 24 hours later, and it also looks like it takes it over Nova Scotia and then just west of Newfoundland by Sunday morning as a wrapped up 958 cyclone. So all the models, like you pointed out, Joe, all the models are pretty much on the same page with all of this.
Right.
All right. So
does it turn it back over toward Alabama? No.
Okay. Now, to be fair, if we go back far enough, and actually, that gives me an idea. If you go back far enough, and unfortunately we can only go back to August 31st, but if we go back to runs last week, do you remember the European run that took it to almost to New Orleans?
Right.
So,
right.
That was a little bit overstated with regards to what
and all of the viewers who watch us on a regular basis know that once you go out, let's say it's that far out, like 5-6 days out,
right,
that you got to take it with caution.
Well, I understand that. It's just that some hay was made over a certain person saying Alabama, okay, and unfortunately, the forecasts, these longer range forecasts, when you look at them and you pull them up, they have these huge wide ranges. So guess what? Louisiana was in there in one of them. Mississippi was in there. Alabama was in there. Florida was in there. There's a certain there's a certain media hypocrisy that's at work with all of this stuff, and that's why I just kind of want to stay along the lines of let the weather people do their job, okay? And
you know how many people questioned me about this? I said, don't get me dragged into this. I don't want to get into this controversy.
I just want to,
But I found it interesting that the National Weather Service last Sunday in Birmingham, Alabama, within 20 minutes after the initial message was sent out, sent their own message out saying, "We are not in the zone of the..."
Right. They were days before. I mean, there wasn't even a zone. It was just sort of this wide map of possibilities. So, it's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. Okay, so this was the European, Joe, from August 30th, okay? And take a look at what it did. So today's the 6th. So amazing, this was 7 days ago.
Amazing.
It actually nailed the track almost perfectly, hugging the Florida coast just offshore, hugging the North Carolina coast, bringing it over Hatteras, and then it looks from here to here. If you draw a straight line, it kind of takes it over Nova Scotia to just west of Newfoundland.
Somebody asked me over this past weekend, he said, why is it all the meteorologists always talk about the European? What is the European to the other models? And I pointed out, I said, well, the other models have generally 20 or 25 what we call ensemble members. The European has 51. And it's a matter of taking those 51 members and making a snapshot, a snapshot of what is happening at the given moment before you start running the computer forward in time. And those extra ensemble members, that's what I guess gives the European the upper edge in against all the other models.
Thank you to Ellen Abraham again from Alaska. Thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. And Lisa Nieves and Scott Briller, the chairman, who earlier hit Super Chat. Thank you so much for that. It's coffee and tea for us.
Oh, lovely.
The Starbucks kind.
Right.
So I'm just going to run back on the chat talk a little bit. Ben McGinnis, he says the Magdalen Islands, am I saying that right, in the Gulf of St. Lawrence will get hit very hard. They're pretty much sandbars in the middle of the Gulf. About 8,000 people live there. Mm-hmm. Have you ever?
No,
I've never been up that.
I've never been there. And in fact, there's a teeny tiny island immediately off of the coast of Nova Scotia called Sable Island. I'm not sure if there's anybody living on that island or whatever, but it's a very tiny little speck of land that's just off of Nova Scotia, and they seem to be right in the path of this thing as well.
And Ben also says there are quite a few cruise ships anchored in Halifax Harbor to wait out the storm.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure of that. Nova Scotia and Newfoundland are very, very popular in the late summer and early fall, both for foliage activity and also for whale watching. And also people like to go up to Newfoundland to see the puffins. I mean, you've never been up there.
I'm going. That's
sometime.
on my list of places to go. And Ben also says that the last direct hit from a tropical storm was Arthur in 2014, and the last hurricane to hit was Earl in 2010. And one, we've been talking about on and off. That produced 144 mile an hour wind gusts in Halifax Harbor.
I believe it. As I said at the onset when I got here, I said there have been other storms over the last decade that have hit Nova Scotia, but one will always be the benchmark. They will always look at a storm and say, how does this compare to one? I'm sure they're thinking about that right now. A lot of people are thinking, is this going to be as bad as one was in 2003?
It's so funny. The last week or so, more and more people are getting into snow conversations already, and we're still into September.
Right, and in fact, in 2003, 2004, there was a massive blizzard that hit Nova Scotia and the Halifax area, and they referred to that as White Juan. They were making comparisons to Juan just a few months earlier, the tropical system, with this wintertime system. That's how damaging that storm was.
And of course, the time of a landfall and the time of high tide is going to be important. And Ben points out that if the storm comes in as modeled, it would come in at low tide, so that would be a plus.
Right. And also, as you mentioned earlier, it's a first quarter moon, so we don't have the astronomically high spring tides we have, which is actually the midway point between the spring tide of full moon and new moon, what is called a neap tide. And so even at high tide, it's not quite as high or as bad in this situation as what we would have had, let's say, this past weekend, or what we're going to have the following weekend when we have the full moon.
Right. Alfred Phillips, our buddy from Wainwright, Alaska, on the North Slope, his average high, he says it's supposed to be 15 Celsius, 58 Fahrenheit here. Wait, is that 15? It's supposed to be 15. You said, now, is it supposed to be 15 degrees for the average high this time of year? Or you're saying that's 15 degrees Celsius?
No, it's got to be 15 Celsius.
Yeah, because he's got 15 F and then 58.
It can't be that cold this soon, this early in the season, even up there.
Right, because they still got over 12 hours of daylight.
Right.
And soon to be shrinking very, very quickly.
Right.
I'm just running back to make sure I didn't miss anybody.
We're losing, in fact, by the way, you pointed this out, Joe, we're losing about, down here in the mid-northern latitudes, we're losing about 2 to 3 minutes a day now. I mean, really, you can see how quickly it's getting dark in the evening and how much darker it is in the morning, when those of you early risers getting up. Very quickly, very funny story, it relates with Yogi Berra. And Yogi, toward the latter part of his career, Yogi, of course, a Hall of Fame catcher, but as he was getting older, Elston Howard took over the catching for the Yankees, and he put Yogi out in left field. And they asked him, how does it feel playing the outfield? And relative to the fact that the shadows were getting longer, faster in August and September, making it more difficult for him to see the balls when they came to him during an afternoon game, Yogi made the comment, it's getting late early out here. In other words, the darkness is descending a lot quicker in late August and especially September during the late afternoon.
Let's see. Philip Neary, who's on Long Island, wants to have winter snowstorm parties, and he's working on a barbecue for the first winter storm.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get through hurricane season, please, and then we can get on with it with regards to the wintertime. And as I've said a few times already, and I'll say it again, there's no connection. There. By the way, Oh, Ben says Halifax Harbor is like a wind tunnel. It's fairly straight, and there are hills on each side.
Right.
So the wind will just get funneled up if it's a south wind, I suppose. By the way, I went and looked at the track of Hurricane 1. It's a different track than this one, because this one, Dorian is coming up from the southwest. One actually came in from the southeast and moved all the way up from just east of the Florida coast, and went basically well east of the Florida coast, and basically went northwest pretty much all the way up. So it came in. Anytime on the East Coast, if you've got something that's coming in from the south with from the south with some easterly component to it, so say if it comes in from the southeast or southeast, or in some cases the east southeast, those are the kinds of storms that really can produce the most devastation when they make landfall.
Sandy, case in point.
And other storms along the way for one reason or another, be it if it was wind or with rain. So you always want to watch the ones that are coming in from the southeast. When they come in from the southwest, it's different. The impact to the shoreline is different. Certainly, you see what happens here, where the area from Delaware to about Rhode Island kind of gets completely skipped over.
Right.
Cape Cod gets something. Down East Maine gets something.
Right.
With the orientation of the coastline, and then straight up into Nova Scotia.
The track is very important, and in fact, to give you an idea, Superstorm Sandy, as the mainstream media refers to it as, well, that superstorm was barely a Category 1 hurricane. But because of the fact that it took that very unusual trajectory coming into central New Jersey on that track that Joe just mentioned, from southeast to northwest, and bringing in all of that water, that's what caused all the devastation or whatever. Meantime, we had Hurricane Donna, far stronger and far more potent than Sandy was, but Donna took the more traditional track to our south and east, closer than what Dorian is doing to us now. There were like 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts at Newark Airport with Donna, but yet the damage was less with Donna as opposed to what they got.
And it's also,
Sandy.
the timing of tides, full moon, that all comes into play. So you have to be really, you got to be careful when you look at storms and you look at past storms, and it's the stock market line of past performance is not necessarily a predictor of future results. You have to hold to that. Jersey Jeff, thanks so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you. That's 2 Starbucks coffees and 2 Starbucks teas for us. Thank you so much.
May I say a word here?
Please.
I'm sure that a vast majority of your viewers are responsible for this. Only a week ago, not even a week ago, it was on Sunday night, I initiated a channel on YouTube, Joe Rayo Weather. I started out with like 3 subscribers. I think we made an announcement here on YouTube.
I'm going to put the link up again for everybody in the chat board. So keep talking.
And my daughter, my wife, and I got a little chuckle at this, but we mentioned this on Monday, and now I have, I think, 108 subscribers and
120.
120. So if you're
interested, you need to put up another video, Joseph.
I will over the weekend.
So
I haven't had a chance. I've been working my fingers off this week. A certain individual has been away for the afternoon meeting thing. You're finally back.
Have I? I do want to address one thing.
Yes.
Okay, and so hang on one second, because I want to read this word for word, because I usually get a lot of these messages and comments during storms.
Rocky and Bullwinkle?
Oh yeah, that's on my recommended list. Hang on a second. When you spend enough time on YouTube will figure out just exactly what Joe likes and what Joe doesn't like, and you'll get these recommended videos. Okay, so I want to read this, and I want to respond to it, and I'm kind of hoping that it was done in sarcasm, but I don't think it was. It wasn't, because it was hashtag know the truth. So this is what this person says. I'm not taking his comment down, at least at the moment. It was put up about 2 hours ago. Satellite radar, and then he's got like 4 boxes there. I don't know if those are Z's.
You know what it might have been? It might have been icons or emojis that just didn't translate onto the YouTube.
So he says, Joe, tell your meteorology buddies to stop lying for the controllers on why these storms are just sitting over populated areas nowadays when they didn't used to do that 20 years ago. Might be because maybe it's a little more populated now than it was 20 years ago, but, I digress. Tell your buddies at the military, I have a lot of buddies in high places, tell your buddies at the military industrial complex, how they create and control and manipulate these particular storms to displace and cause death over large populated coastal cities and the islands. So I am going to respond to this person by saying, A, you're a narcissist. B, you are... I find that those that are proponents of this sort of stuff just sort of sit around and say, hey, I've got this piece of information that you don't have. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you this information and you need to follow me.
Right.
Okay. So I will say what I've said to many other people that have posted on here with those kind of comments. This is a weather channel. So we do meteorology and we do science here. We also have fun and do cartoon songs, and we do all sorts of other things to try to get a few laughs. But what we don't do are geoengineering. We don't do conspiracy theories. We don't do military-industrial complex controlling storms and driving them every which way but loose. If you want to talk about those subject matters, I can give you a list of channels that you can go to, and you can have those conversations with people that think the way you do. Okay? That's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yeah,
you
it
think,
works for
okay?
me. Yeah.
So if anybody is watching here and is tempted tonight, if you're watching this on a replay and you're going to give me the...
So he's saying that we're in control now of tropical systems like Dorian sitting over, let's say, the Bahamas.
All of them.
All of them. But it says that this is something new that didn't
Right.
happen 20 years ago.
Well, no, and that the controllers, whoever they may be, drive them intentionally to populated areas to kill them, to kill people, or I don't know. I don't understand any of that.
The first thing that pops into my head, which obviously did not happen 20, but actually happened more like 40 or 45 years ago, a storm that didn't really move very much, was Agnes. You remember Agnes,
I
right?
remember Agnes.
June of 1972, came up and just sat for days and days on end over Pennsylvania. I'm sure that there was some kind of military-industrial complex that was controlling Agnes back in 72. Record floods from that tropical system back in 1972. Yes, it did happen many, many years ago. Stuff like that happened, and it will continue to happen from time to time in the years ahead.
I've been accused of being on the payroll. It just
extends also to aeronautics, NASA. So one guy told me, he said, "You know what NASA stands for? The acronym." I said, "Yeah, National Aeronautics and Space." He said, "No." He says, "Never a straight answer."
Yeah,
there are things out there that they're not telling us that it's amazing.
Well, look, sometimes it's hard to fathom. Sometimes it becomes very hard to fathom when you see a category. Joe, did you ever think in your lifetime that you would see a Category 5 hurricane stall out for 36 hours, sitting literally over one island?
No.
I mean, we have seen storms do that over the course of our 80 years.
Right.
And those 80 years are actually 40 together, so that's really 40 years we still are seeing things that we've never seen before.
Right.
Because, hey, we don't live forever, so we're not on this earth for a very long time. I doubt we're here long enough to sample every possibility in terms of climate and in terms of weather. And look, things sometimes happen because that's sort of the way nature works. And there's no nefarious explanation for why they happen. Okay? And also, by the way, this also goes, what I said also applies to folks that use these things for political advantage. I have to tell you, you've got people in the Bahamas right now that are dying because they haven't been. Many of them have not even been found yet because they can't get to them.
Right.
Okay, you do a tremendous amount of disrespect to those people whose lives are still hanging in the balance from this devastating natural event, okay? And all you can think of doing is sitting there on a chair with your arms folded and saying, well, this is all this orchestrated conspiracy. You know what? Write a check. Write a check to a reputable organization that can use that money to help these people who need basic essentials that you're enjoying that they're not. Rather than sit there and mold these conspiracies and use this as opportunities to advance some sort of political agenda, whatever it may be, either on the right or on the left, shut up, take out your money, because you have to put your money where your mouth is. Take out your money and send it to a reputable organization that's going down there to help those people out. Plain and simple. Then come talk to me afterward, and we'll have a conversation.
Think about, let's say for a moment, of extraterrestrials on another planet looking at this planet Earth and examining it and taking into account all the things that happen in terms of the geophysical. And they take note of the fact that these hurricanes, these tropical cyclones, occur during the mid and late summer, and this is the way that our planet Earth gets rid of all of the surplus, the excess heat that is built up in the tropics during the summertime. It's a very efficient way of doing it, at least in terms of the Earth, causing these massive storms. Now, if you're on another planet and looking at the Earth and knowing that this is happening, you might say to somebody outside, well, why is it that the people who inhabit that planet build and they decide to inhabit zones like the Caribbean, like the Bahamas, like the southeastern United States, where in all likelihood at some point these massive storms are going to come in and cause great destruction and devastation? Why do they do it? Why don't they just stay away from those islands? It's because they're beautiful, and because more often than not, 95% of the time, nothing is happening of this nature. It's beautiful, it's tranquil. So you build and you populate or whatever like that, and you just hope that, time is the worst enemy.
Yeah.
Everybody says that, well, it'll happen, but it's not going to happen now.
A lot of them, when we get these kind of events, they're multi-generational events.
Right.
When they happen, you suddenly feel vulnerable because you think it's going to happen again right away.
Right.
And we saw what happened with Irma and Maria in that one rare instance that it did. But when you look back, some of these islands, they hadn't seen a hurricane in 50 years, 75 years, even 100 years.
Right.
So, they don't, and as you said, well, the weather's been relatively calm over a period of time.
It's not going to happen.
They build
Even
here.
in New York City, for years, I saw at least 2 technical papers talking about what would happen if a storm took a track south and west of like a tropical system, south and west of New York City, and talking about how devastating floods could come in and cause all kind of wreak havoc in New York and Long Island coastal areas, and we said the same thing. Well, how many times has that happened? That's
Storms never come in from the
southeast.
southeast.
Storms never do that. Well, guess what?
Right.
It did, and you saw what happened. So,
2 things, because we're going to just change subjects here now. The last thing we'll say about the subject that I started with my little rant is, as Ben points out about organizations in terms of being reputable, the easiest thing you can do is go online and find out, if you want looking at whatever organization without endorsing any particular one, find out how much out of every dollar goes to administrative costs. You want to donate to an organization where the administrative costs are very low. If you find one that's keeping 90% for administrative purposes, you don't want to donate there. You want to donate to something that maybe uses 10% of the money for administrative and 90% goes to the people who need it. And Philip Neary, who's plotting this wintertime barbecue, noted that you and I have 2 red ties, that we have 2 power ties on.
Okay.
So he wants to know who planned it first.
I don't know. I just arbitrarily look for a tie and just to wear it. It's actually not a full red tie. It's more like a striped tie, isn't it? Or
Yeah, mine's more redder than red.
maybe I should wear my blue tie on Monday.
Well, don't it's oddly enough, and this has happened to me over the years, working with the anchor teams that we work with on the set on a daily basis. It winds up a lot of the time. There are days where we will come in and we will all have this. Now, there's a limited number of colors that we can wear. So the odds of it happening are probably higher, but still, there are times where the male female anchor and the weather person and the sports person are all wearing the same colors,
Right.
Same jacket, same color pants, same color ties, and it almost, you would like to think, do you guys call each other beforehand to
Right.
fight? And we don't.
Right, we don't.
But it just, you start thinking the same way for some reason.
It just happens.
It does. And like we just happen. Every day we happen. So here's my plan, just to let everybody know. Unless there's something that gets in my way, I'm going to attempt a live stream tomorrow at noon, as Dorian is getting very, very close to Nova Scotia. So just make a notation of that, and I will schedule it on the channel so that you'll get a notification with regards to it. Again, if something may get in the way and I won't be able to do it, but if I can, I'm going to try to live stream tomorrow at noon. Ben McGinnis says maybe the controllers plan the ties. And
there was in 1978.
Yep, I'm sorry. Patricia Owens says that she saw a bumper sticker once that said, "Beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life down here."
Oh, yeah. Well, Al Capp, who used to do Little Abner, just before we landed on the moon in 1969, they asked a number of famous people, individuals, what do you think? What are your comments about the impending landing on the moon? And Al Capp said, I hope they find intelligent life up there because there's so damn little of it down here.
Yeah.
Al Capp.
All right, so let's wrap it up tonight.
I was about to say 1978. Maybe it's available on Amazon. If any of you are interested, a wonderful book I found. It really held me, when I first got it. Blizzard by George Stone. Not the New York Met pitcher from 1973, but 1978, Blizzard by George Stone. And Joe, it's a science fiction story about how secret government individuals, they built a giant generator along the mid-Atlantic coastline of the United States. And what they did was, every time a small storm passed off of Virginia coast or the Outer Banks, they would turn the generator on, warm the oceans up, and see if they could energize the storm and cause it to be a lot stronger than predicted. And in this particular science fiction thing, they turn the generator on, but something malfunctions and they can't turn it off. And so the storm comes up and it ends up stalling off the mid-Atlantic coast, 85-foot drifts on top of the White House. That's at the end of the story. But they're trying to get to the generator to pull the plugs, so to speak.
That's too funny.
I'm sure it's somewhere. Maybe you can get it on Amazon or whatever like that. I got an autographed copy actually from George Stone, who wrote the book.
That's
so
too funny.
I'm surprised they didn't make it into a science fiction movie. It sounds like something that would really have been riveting if they did.
Weekend plans?
Mow the lawn and relax.
Yeah, I have to. I got to pull a carpet out of my basement, and unfortunately, it's got stuff on the carpet that has to be moved before the carpet can be pulled, including a rather heavy sectional sofa that when I look at it, I wonder how in the name of God did they get it down there. But nonetheless, it needs to be moved in the carpet. So that's kind of my front and center project at the moment.
Okay.
So that's my weekend.
All right.
And
watching Dorian too.
And watching Dorian. So I'm going to try again, as I said, around noontime tomorrow to do a live stream, and I will schedule it ahead of time if it looks like I'll know tomorrow morning if I'll be able to do it, and then I may take Sunday off. Okay, so just letting you guys know ahead of time. In which case, I'll be back on Monday. So we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great weekend. Be safe, and for those of you watching from Nova Scotia and Canada, do what you got to do. You don't need us to tell you what you have to do. You guys already know.
We're thinking about you.
Yes.
Even early this week, I would say, as I was leaving the Bahamas, I said to Peter King on his Facebook page, and he is the CBS radio reporter and anchor. Sometimes you hear him on the World News Roundup or whatever. And I was talking to him, and I said, I really feel for the people in Nova Scotia. They're going to have a tough weekend. So tough it out, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and we'll see you back next week, and hopefully everything will turn out okay.
Good night, everybody.